Okay, students, today we're going to be discussing impeachment, which you may know is a method through which an elected official, such as a president, could be removed from office. We're going to start by talking about a question-focused document, another cartoon by Thomas Nast, this one from 1868. Title of the cartoon, This Little Boy Would Persist in Handling Books Above His Capacity, and this was a disastrous result. He may look familiar, but just in case he doesn't, this is Andrew Johnson, President Andrew Johnson. Remember, he was the one that took over when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. What seems to have happened to President Johnson, the, quote, little boy? What was he trying to get off the shelf? And what was the result of that? Try and figure out how this cartoon above might be related to a problem that's happening today. Are there any questions about today's president and his use of the Constitution? Then take a moment, look back at the cartoon, and create your own question about the document. Remember that if you create a question that you can answer using evidence from our case study, you can get extra credit for it. Now we're going to move on to the contemporary policy debate. We're going to learn about the debate over impeaching President Trump today. We're going to use this article to do so. Remember that we're trying to find out what the situation is, what people propose to be the solution to that problem, why people support and oppose the position, and then you're going to tell me your stance on it. So this article from January 28th is 6 months after the whole impeachment ordeal began, when over the summer a recording, a transcript was released of a conversation President Trump had with President Zelensky of Ukraine. Some people question what was said in that transcript, and that began an investigation that led to this impeachment trial. We're going to listen to the arguments of one of the impeachment managers, Adam Schiff, and the argument of President Trump's defense team. Here's the situation. The Democrats charged Trump, who was impeached last month by the House of Representatives, with abusing the power of the presidency and obstructing Congress, and that his actions merit conviction and removal from office. So the Democrats impeached the president because they said, number one, he abused power of the presidency. You know that the president of the United States has lots of powers. If he uses those to his own advantage, would that be abusing those powers? And then obstructing Congress. We need to understand what obstructing means. Think of an obstacle. If you put an obstacle in someone's way, you make it hard for them to do what they need to do. Congress says that the president got in their way of their investigations related to the impeachment inquiry. And that in itself is a problem, according to them. So let's listen to White House counsel Pat Cipollone and see what reasons he gives why President Trump should not be removed from office.
What they are asking you to do is to throw out a successful president on the eve of an election with no basis and in violation of the Constitution. It would dangerously change our country and weaken forever all of our democratic institutions. You all know that's not in the interest of the American people. Why not trust the American people with this decision? Why tear up their ballots? Why tear up every ballot across this country? You can't do that. You know you can't do that. So I ask you to defend our Constitution, to defend fundamental fairness, to defend basic due process rights, but most importantly, to respect and defend the sacred right of every American to vote and to choose their president. The election is only months away. The American people are entitled to choose their president. Overturning the last election and massively interfering with the upcoming one would cause serious and lasting damage to the people of the United States and to our great country. The Senate cannot allow this to happen. It is time for this to end, here and now.
Pat made some pretty convincing arguments to some, especially this idea, why tear up their ballots? President Trump is in office because he was elected by the people of the United States. If he is removed by Congress and the Senate, are they then, as he said, tearing up their ballots? Is that going against the people's wishes? Do you understand what Pat is saying are reasons why we should not remove the president from office? He describes it as unconstitutional, and he talked a lot about how it's overturning the people's right to choose the president. Now we're going to listen to Adam Schiff and see what he gives as the reasons why President Trump should be removed.
As charged in the first article of impeachment, President Trump has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to national security and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. Based on the abuse of power for which he was impeached and his ongoing efforts to solicit foreign interference, both directly and through Mr. Giuliani, there can be little doubt that President Trump will continue to invite foreign interference in our elections again and again. That poses an imminent threat to the integrity of our democracy. Our founders understood that a president like Donald Trump might one day grasp the reins of power. An unremorseful, overreaching executive, faithful to himself only and willing to sacrifice our democracy and national security for his own personal advantage. His pattern of conduct, repeatedly soliciting foreign interference in our elections for his own benefit, confirms that he will stop at nothing to retain his power. He willfully chose to place his own personal interests above the country's and the integrity of our elections. There is every reason to believe that will continue.
That was Adam Schiff. He was an impeachment manager, meaning he was a member of the House of Representatives who came to the Senate to try and argue for President Trump's removal. What reasons did he give for why President Trump should be removed? He declared Trump a threat to the integrity of our democracy. How did he describe President Trump? And how did he describe those as reasons why he should be removed? So you now have to make up your minds. You have people on one side who said President Trump abused his power, and then people on the other side say that removing President Trump is overturning the election, and they think that that is then Congress abusing their power. If you have questions, pause and ask your teacher. All right, now that we know what's happening today related to impeachment, we need to go back in time and study another impeachment. We're going to be studying the articles of impeachment against President Johnson. We're going to go to our webpage, and we're trying to find out What consequences should Congress consider when debating impeachment? This is our case study, these articles of impeachment against President Andrew Johnson. We'll read over these different articles and try and identify what was President Johnson being accused of in his articles of impeachment. The articles read, articles established by the House of Representatives in the name of themselves and all the people of the United States against Andrew Johnson, in support of their impeachment against him for high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 1. That said Andrew Johnson did unlawfully and in violation of the Constitution try to remove Edwin M. Stanton from the office of the Secretary for the Department of War. Andrew Johnson was guilty of a high misdemeanor in office. This first article, they said he violated the Constitution. That sounds like something a president should get in trouble for. Article 10. Andrew Johnson did attempt to bring into hatred the Congress of the United States. Andrew Johnson, as the Chief Magistrate of the United States, said, I call upon your Congress that is trying to break up the government. Congress had undertaken to poison the minds of the American people. How could the president saying things like this about Congress be problematic? Congress is supposed to be an equal branch of power to the president. If the president harms Congress's ability to do their job, is that problematic? Andrew Johnson has brought the high office of the President of the United States into disgrace, to the great scandal of all good citizens. He was then and there guilty of a high misdemeanor in office. He was being disgraceful and being scandalous. Should we allow our president to act that kind of way? All right, Article 11. That said Andrew Johnson, in disregard of the Constitution and laws of the United States, declared that the 39th Congress of the United States was not a Congress of the United States. Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, did unlawfully and in disregard of the requirements of the Constitution attempt to prevent the execution of an act regulating the tenure of certain civil offices, an act making appropriations for the support of the Army for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 1868, and for other purposes, an act to provide for the more efficient government of the United States. This is a list of different laws that they said President Johnson was not executing, and as president, his oath of office includes that he will work to make sure all laws are executed. By doing so, Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, did commit and was guilty of a high misdemeanor in office. And the House of Representatives do demand that said Andrew Johnson may be put to answer the high crimes and misdemeanors in office herein charged against him. What have they accused President Johnson of doing? In a number of different articles, they accused him of doing a number of different things. Try and summarize for me a few of the important ones. Now we need to find out what was going on at the time. Why was impeachment even being debated? For our historic context, we need to look all the way back to 1788, when the Constitution was ratified. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution said, the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. This is important because we need to acknowledge that the founders in the Constitution included a tool that would allow for these really powerful elected figures to be removed from their office. They said treason, bribery were two reasons they could be removed. But this other high crimes and misdemeanors is kind of a vague and open-ended option. On April 15th, 1865, Vice President Andrew Johnson became president after Lincoln's assassination. Johnson disagreed with radical Republicans in Congress. They were trying to guarantee the rights of the formerly enslaved people and punish the former leaders of the Confederacy. Johnson swore an oath to execute the laws of the United States, but he refused to enforce the Reconstruction laws passed by Congress he disagreed with. As you know, the last couple of assignments that we've worked on have been related to Reconstruction. This is what we discussed, that after the end of the Civil War, they were trying to rebuild the South, and the view that the radical Republicans in Congress has was that the formerly enslaved people would have all of their rights respected, and that the leaders of the Confederacy would not be easily able to just walk back into power. Andrew Johnson didn't seem to agree with those objectives. Congress had passed a law called the Tenure of Office Act to stop Johnson from firing Lincoln's cabinet officials. Johnson tried to veto the act, but was overridden by Congress. Remember that if a president vetoes a bill, it never becomes law. But if Congress truly believes in the power of the bill, they can override his veto and make it become law without his approval. The House of Representatives created articles of impeachment against Johnson when he tried to fire Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. So, Edwin Stanton had been appointed by Lincoln. The Congress liked Lincoln's people. They didn't like the idea of Johnson being able to fire them and bring in his own people. So for step 2A, tell me what was going on. Who had become president? How did they become president? And why was Congress unhappy with him? Now it's time to investigate the arguments for and against the impeachment of President Andrew Johnson. Section 1, we're going to try and find out what arguments are made in favor of impeaching a president. We're going to start by reading a speech by a Republican from Pennsylvania named Thaddeus Stevens. This is Thaddeus Stevens. We need to find out why he thinks President Johnson should be removed. Remember, as we read, lines that you think really do a good job of explaining why the president should be removed, you need to highlight and change the text color to red. Representative Stevens said, "Now, in defiance of the Office Tenure Act, Andrew Johnson commanded Lorenzo Thomas to take possession of the Department of War and to eject the incumbent E.M. Stanton. Here, if this act stood alone, would be an undeniable official misdemeanor and punishable in a criminal proceeding. If Andrew Johnson escapes with bare removal from office and not prison time, he may thank the weakness or the clemency of Congress and not his own innocence." Talk about this real quick. How does he describe Andrew Johnson's action? Was it no big deal? Or was it criminal? He then goes on to say, "Nowhere, either in the Constitution or by statute, has the President power to create a vacancy by firing an officer and fill it without the advice and consent of the Senate. Here is a plain recorded violation of the Constitution. Every honest and intelligent man should give his vote for impeachment." This is a pretty blunt argument in favor of removal. if he just simply says that the president violated the Constitution, is that an argument for him being removed, for him being impeached? Then Stevens continued, Andrew Johnson tried to rule the former Confederate States by his own power alone. He is since known to have obstructed the authority of Congress and has advised the inhabitants of the South to resist the legislation of Congress. In my judgment, his conduct ought long ago to have brought him to impeachment and trial, to have removed him from his position of great mischief. We have the accusation of him obstructing Congress. And again, remember that Congress is supposed to be an equal branch with the president. If the president stops them from doing their job, is he doing something that he should get removed from his position for? Mr. Stevens seems to think so. Last paragraph. I trust that when we come to vote upon this question, we shall remember that the sovereign power of the nation rests in Congress, who have been placed around the executive as watchmen to enforce his obedience to the law and the Constitution. His oath to obey the Constitution and our duty to compel him to do it are a tremendous obligation. We are to protect or to destroy the liberty and happiness of a mighty people and defend them against every kind of tyranny. I think in his conclusion paragraph here, he makes some pretty powerful statements. He describes them as the watchmen of the Constitution, who are supposed to enforce the president obedience to the Constitution. He's placing the responsibility of keeping the president in check on Congress. They have the duty to compel or force him to obey the Constitution. After you have highlighted parts of the speech that you think best explain why a president should be removed, you need to complete the sentence. This quote means what? Put what he says in your own words. After you've done that, you need to explain why that evidence matters for today's debate. How is what was said about President Johnson back in 1868 related to today's debate in 2020 over the removal of President Trump? All right, so our visual, our cartoon, you have two different choices. Depending upon what ideas you focused on in the speech, you have two different choices. Let me explain this. There's two sections there's two cartoons in section 1 in the case study. You need to select the cartoon that makes a different argument than the argument you took out of the speech above. If in the speech above you discussed an abuse of power, select the This Little Boy cartoon. If you discussed a violation of the Constitution, select the King Andy cartoon. So you're going to go to the web page and you're going to copy the title of the cartoon that's appropriate, paste it there. You're going to copy the cartoon, paste it here, and then summarize and make your conclusion. Briefly discussing those. Here's President Johnson again. How is President Johnson dressed in this cartoon? These members of Congress back here marching out of the Capitol building. What's President Johnson having done to these members of Congress? And who's in chains down here? Long live King Andy the First. Do you want Andrew Johnson, president or king? In this cartoon, what are they trying to say about Andrew Johnson? How is he behaving? How much you relate that to the behaviors some are describing of President Trump? Or you are working with this cartoon, which you recognize from before. President Johnson again, getting smushed by the Constitution. What was President Johnson doing that led to this? So between these two cartoons, you're going to pick the one that best meets your needs, paste it here, and summarize it. And don't forget to tell me why that evidence matters for today's debate over removing President Trump. We now need to go to section 2 and find out why some people oppose removing the president. We're going to read a speech by a Democrat from New York named James Brooks, giving his speech against impeaching Andrew Johnson. In his speech, he said, "Mr. Speaker, I resist this unconstitutional proceeding. A minority of the party on the other side has at last succeeded in compelling its party to demand the impeachment of the President of the United States. A legislative power not representing the people attempts to overthrow the President. There is nothing new in what we are doing. For men of the present but repeat the history of the past. We are traversing over and over again the days of Cromwell, Charles I, and Charles II, and the scenes of the French Revolution, baptized in blood." There's historic references here. He's talking about the kings of England who had their heads cut off, and scenes from the French Revolution, if you remember the guillotine from your studies in world history. He goes on to say, "I bid the leaders of the House beware before they proceed further in their revolutionary steps. Suppose you should succeed. What then? You can impeach the President of the United States for the hat he wears or for the color of his coat?" Saying that if we can impeach him this time for this, what comes next? Will we be able to impeach future presidents for just whatever they want? He continued, "Proceed in your forms of impeachment, but step an inch further and over the bounds of that Constitution, and you precipitate this country upon the verge of violence and revolution. Because he has exercised what in good faith he has believed to be his constitutional authority as president, Mr. Stevens summons us here to convict the president of crimes and misdemeanors. The president is the primary judge of the Constitution. It is not only his right, but it is the right of every citizen to judge the Constitution of the United States." So, as we learned in the first side, some people believe that President Johnson had violated the Constitution. It's being argued here that he didn't violate the Constitution. He was doing what he thought the Constitution gave him the power to do. He concluded by saying, "Here, for the first time in the history of our country, a party committee comes before Congress and demands the removal of the President of the United States. I beg the party upon the other side to consider the fatal danger of establishing such a precedent as this." He wants them to stop and think for a second. What's going to happen if we impeach a president? It has The president has never been removed from office before like this. What might be the consequences? After you have selected what you consider to be the most important quote and you've summarized it, don't forget to make the connection between today's debate over the removal of President Trump. How is what was said by him opposing removing Johnson similar to what's said today in opposition to removing Trump? As our visual document, we're going to look at a cartoon from 1868 from Harper's Weekly titled "The Situation." We have people over here on the left side and some people on the right side. Who do we have on the right side? Does this look like President Johnson again? And over here, we have Congress, members of Congress, the War Office trying to do what? What are they pointing this cannon at? President Johnson over here, right? So if before they were arguing that they needed to impeach Johnson because he was abusing his powers, what does it seem that Congress is now doing? Are they treating Johnson with much respect? They're passing legislation such as this office bill here with the intent to just harm Johnson because they don't like him. So if one side argues remove Johnson for abusing his power, the other side argues they shouldn't remove Johnson. It's Congress who's abusing their power. Okay, we now need to discuss the results of the debate. In 1868, the House of Representatives voted 126 to 47 in favor of a resolution to impeach the president. The House then adopted the 11 articles of impeachment. After being impeached by the House of Representatives, President Andrew Johnson's case was sent to the Senate for his trial. Remember, there's multiple steps in the process of impeachment. First, he's impeached by the House of Representatives. If that passes, then it goes to trial in the Senate. If he is not impeached in the House of Representatives, the whole thing ends there. But Andrew Johnson was impeached. At the time, the Senate was made up of 54 senators representing 27 states. The Senate voted on only 3 of the articles of impeachment. All 3 votes resulted in counts of 35 guilty to 19 not guilty. Because the Constitution requires a 2/3 of the members of the Senate to vote guilty to convict a president of impeachment, the Senate was 1 vote short of convicting Andrew Johnson. This means President Johnson was not removed from office. It should be noted that one reason senators may have voted against impeaching Johnson was not because they believed what he did wasn't wrong, but instead because they were worried about the radical Republican Senator Ben Wade, who would have become president if Johnson was impeached. Andrew Johnson was able to finish out his term as president, leaving the presidency March 4th, 1869. But during the remainder of his time as president, he was weakened as an official. So Johnson, while still in office, wasn't effective as a president, and while he was never elected president because he became president only since Lincoln had been assassinated, when he was up for election, he did not win. So what did the policymakers decide to do? They impeached Johnson, but what did they not do? What were the consequences of that policy decision? So he wasn't removed from office, but did that change what he was able to do as president? Did it affect his ability to get reelected? Those are what you should consider. We now need to compare and contrast the two debates. What's similar between the two policy debates? We're obviously talking about impeachment. And what's the similarity in impeachment? In both cases, were we arguing over constitutional issues? In both cases, did they say the president abused his constitutional powers? They did. In both cases, did they say the president obstructed Congress, got in the way of Congress's ability to do their job? That would be similarities between the two. Unique about the past policy debate, you could say something about how Johnson had never been elected president, as opposed to President Trump, who was elected president. All right, so now you've looked at both different sides of the argument over today's debate. You've studied an example of an impeachment of the past. It's now time to complete your policy advice form. Based on what you know about impeachment, the history of impeachment, and what President Trump has been doing, you need to either support or oppose the impeachment of President Trump. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask me.